Hello, my name's Anna Miller. I'm the Associate Pastor here at First United Methodist Church in Albany, and I am glad that you are joining us for our Red Sea journey. We have been reading through Robert Morgan's book, The Red Sea Rules, and today we come to rule number 6, which is when we're unsure, we are to take that next logical step of faith. Now, before we step forward, I want to step back just a little bit and review what God has already instructed the Israelites to do. Now, so far in chapter 14 of Exodus, we find that Pharaoh and the Egyptian army has hemmed in the Israelites before the Red Sea. They are trapped with no way for escape. God, we know, has led them there for a reason. God knows right where they are, and God is with them. And He promises that He will be glorified in this, and He is to be glorified in the good times as well as the difficult times. And so we know that God is with us, that we are here for a reason. We acknowledge that the enemy is there, keeping our eyes yet on the Lord, and that we are to pray, we are to stand still, remain calm, and let God do His work. So when we've done all this, when we have acknowledged our enemy, we have stood still, we have looked to God, we have prayed, we have given our difficult situation to God, just like the Israelites, then we step out in faith with that most logical next step that we are to take. Now today we're going to look at Exodus 14, verse 15. Exodus 14, verse 15. And then the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward." Tell the Israelites to go forward. You see, when we've done these steps, when we have finally come to that point to where we have to trust God that He will make a way, at some point we have to move forward. What is most logical in our eyes with what we know as God's truth and His Word, what we know that God has told us, we're supposed to move forward. And now this logical step that Robert Morgan talks about, it doesn't seem very logical to step forward into a Red Sea. Or what are we going to do? Swim across? So what are we really faced with here? What are the Israelites really faced with here? In my eyes, I see that they've got 3 options. They can stand still and cry, like God said. Why are you crying out to me? Just take a step forward. Move forward. Not backward, but forwards. And so we can, number 1, stand still and cry and be attacked by the Pharaoh's army. Or we can turn back and fight the enemy. But we already know that the Israelites were not equipped for warfare. They were not warriors. They didn't have any equipment. They didn't have any training. And so our third option is that we move forward, that we take a step of faith into the Red Sea. So finally, when we make that decision, not to stand still, but to move forward, trusting that God will make a way, we can do so in faith because we know that God said to do this. We know that God has led the Israelites all the way to this point thus far. And see, God doesn't change. He is the same yesterday and today, and He will be the same tomorrow. Where He has led us all in the past to the point that we are today, He will continue to lead us into the future if we keep our eyes on Him. Now, I want to share with you just a spiritual truth that I have learned and that I have come to believe in my prayer journey, in my spiritual journey also. After prayer and reflection, when I'm in that spot where I don't know what my next steps are, what I'm supposed to take and do, that I'm to move forward in faith after prayer and reflection and do the best I can with what I have as I know God's truth and believe that my next step is the most logical step that He wants me to make. After prayer and reflection, that I move forward in faith, doing the best I can with what I know to be God's truth at that point. Now, we don't know all things. I don't know all things. We can't see ahead, but we usually can see what our most logical next step is. Now, I wouldn't say stepping out in the Red Sea and moving forward is a logical step, but at this point, it's the most logical of the three options. And so we move forward with what we know and believe that God has said it's okay to move forward in this step. Now, we don't know what all lies ahead, but we do know that God will be with us. He knows where we are, and that He will see us through. God has never let me down. Now, I will say this, God is still working on my prayer list. I have a lot on my prayer list that He has yet to answer, but He has not let me down. And the important thing is that He has been with me every step that I have moved forward in faith, trusting in Him. Now, if we think about spiritual maturity maturity is not reacting based on how we feel in the moment. We don't just stand there in anxiety and panic and fear, but we know that God is with us in our situation when we have prayed and given it to Him, when we have watched and waited for Him to respond, and then we carefully consider how we're to move forward in faith. Now, that's our key phrase, by faith, that we move forward by faith. We are to trust in God day by day and step by step and moment by moment. I want to share with you some quotes in Robert's book, quotes of faith. And the first one is by Isabel Kahn, and she is was a Canadian missionary back in the early 1900s. And listen to what she says. I have found that if we go as far as we can, God often opens up the rest of the way. Another quote from my favorite commentator, and y'all know who that is by now, Matthew Henry. He says this: Moses' silent prayers of faith prevailed more with God than Israel's loud cries of fear. And God says here, why are you crying out to me? Move forward. It's time to take a step forward. I also want to share with you a couple of quotes. This one is by Sir William Osler. Now, Sir William was a medical student in the late 1800s, and he was profoundly anxious about his future, about his career, about graduating from school and having to embark on a medical practice all on his own. And he got to a point to where he was almost near a mental breakdown. And he later became one of the most famous physicians in his era. But he heard this quote by Thomas Carlyle, and it changed his life. Our main business is not to see what lies dimly at a distance, but to do what lies clearly at hand. This gave him the hope that he needed to move forward in faith. And he organized, we're told, the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. He was knighted by the King of England and became the subject of numerous biographies. He was one of the most famous physicians of his era, yet when he was in school, He was almost at a standstill because of his anxiety and his panic and fear. You know, we have some spiritual truths in Scripture that when we get in that difficult situation where we don't know what we're supposed to do, as we think about stepping out in faith, we know what Jesus taught us on the Sermon on the Mount. He said, don't be anxious for tomorrow. God will take care of your tomorrow too. Live one day at a time. We are just to live one day at a time. Let God handle the rest. Let's just move forward in faith with what we know to do right here and right now. Now, I want to read a little bit further into Exodus. I promised you last week that the Red Sea was about to open up. And so listen to what happens next. But Moses, you lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the Israelites might go into the sea on dry ground. Then I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and so that I will gain glory for myself over Pharaoh and all his army, his chariots, and his chariot drivers. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I have gained glory for myself over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his chariot drivers. But see, Moses didn't step into the Red Sea on dry ground. Moses stepped into the wet Red Sea by faith, trusting that God was going to do what he said he was going to do. He stepped in before the sea had parted. And God gave Moses a simple plan. Just tell him to move forward and trust me. Tell him to move forward. You know, God generally leads us step by step, moment by moment, day by day. We're not told what tomorrow is. We don't know what tomorrow is. And here's some spiritual truths that Robert points out. Nehemiah tells us the pillar of cloud led them forward day by day, and the pillar of fire by night. They weren't told where they were going or when they would reach the promised land. In fact, they wandered around in the wilderness, literally in circles, for 40 years. But they had to trust just for that moment and just for that day. And God even fed them day by day by manna in the morning and quail. They weren't given provision past the current day. Psalms 42 tells us, day by day also the Lord pours out his steadfast love upon me. Praise be to God that day by day, God's mercy and love is new to us each and every morning. Psalm 110:3 says, your strength shall be renewed day by day like morning dew. Our strength, he gives us what we need. We know by the Lord's Prayer, Lord, give us this day our daily bread. And God does. He provides. He provides what we need. If we knew what the next day was and the next day was, if we were told all things in the beginning, that wouldn't be living by faith, would it? Faith is believing even when we cannot see past our current day. You know, the next time that we don't know what our next step is, we are not to fear, we are not to panic, but we are to seek God in his light for our next step. And we have to trust that he's going to guide us in small increments, even if we can't see what lies ahead. The Christian life is believing and trusting in God when we don't know what we're to do. We stop for a moment and we say, God, I'm going to do this. This is the best that I know to do with what I have, with what I know to be your truth is. I've given it to you. And I sense that this is the best way to move forward. And so I'm stepping out in faith, and I'm going to trust you that you will go before me and that you will make a way. I hope you will too. And whatever difficult situation you might be in, as you look to God, as you give it to him and ask, God, what is this that you want me to do. He will make a way. And you just step out with the most logical step that you know at that moment. And God is going to bless you for that. He is going to be with you. He is going to guide you. And you cannot fail when you've got God with you and you're trusting in faith. I hope that you have a great week. I hope that whatever your difficult situation is, that you will step out in faith with God this week. That you will not be panicked and in fear, but that you will trust and believe in Him. Next week, we're going to learn how God protects us as we move forward in faith. God is finally opening the waters to give us redemption from the enemy. So I hope you'll join me next week